I spend my days building things that last. 22 years as a structural engineer, and I can tell you whether a foundation will hold or crack just by looking at the blueprints. I've inspected bridges, hospitals, skyscrapers. I once caught a hairline fracture in a support beam that would have collapsed an entire parking garage. They gave me an award for that. Said I saved lives. Funny thing is, I couldn't see the cracks in my own house. Not the literal ones. The ones running straight through the middle of my marriage, put there by the two people I trusted most in this world, my wife and my best friend. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what happened on a Tuesday afternoon in September, when I was sitting in my home office in Cedar Ridge, a quiet suburb about 40 minutes outside of Austin, Texas. I was reviewing plans for a new community center when my phone buzzed. An email from someone called Truth finds you, 22. The subject line read, "You deserve to know what's happening behind your back." I almost deleted it, thought it was spam. But something made me open it, and inside was a video file and 6 words. Your wife, your best friend, watch. I sat there for maybe 10 seconds before I clicked play. The video was shot from an angle above, like a security camera mounted high on a wall. It showed a bedroom I didn't recognize. And in that bedroom were 2 people I recognized immediately. My wife, Rachel, and my best friend since college, Derek Patterson. They weren't just talking. They were tangled together in a way that left zero room for interpretation. At one point, Rachel laughed and said something that the microphone barely caught. Something about how I was probably still at the office running numbers, clueless as always. Derek laughed too. Said I was the most predictable man alive, and that's what made this so easy. I watched the whole thing. 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Then I closed my laptop, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of bourbon, and sat on the back porch staring at the oak tree I'd planted when my daughter was born. That tree was 17 years old now. Strong roots, deep in the ground, everything I thought my family was. Rachel and I had been married 19 years. We met at a barbecue thrown by mutual friends the summer after I graduated from UT Austin. She was finishing her business degree, sharp and funny and the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. We got married a year later, had our first kid Emma when Rachel was 25. Then came our son Jack 2 years later, and our youngest Chloe 3 years after that. Emma was 17 now, Jack 15, Chloe 12. 3 good kids. Honor roll, church on Sundays when we could make it, family game nights on Fridays. I coached Jack's baseball team for 6 years. Rachel ran the PTA like a Fortune 500 company. From the outside, we were the family everyone wanted to be. Derek had been part of the picture almost as long. We roomed together junior year at UT. He was the best man at my wedding. When he married his wife Laura 8 years ago, I stood right next to him. Laura was a pediatric nurse, sweet and quiet, the kind of woman who baked cookies for the neighbors when they moved in. Derek and Laura had 2 kids, Aiden, 7, and Sophie, 5. Our families spent holidays together. We went on a joint vacation to the Gulf Coast every summer. My kids called Derek Uncle D. His kids called me Uncle Mike. So you can imagine what that video did to me. I didn't confront Rachel that night. I don't know how I managed it, but when she came home from her real estate office at 6:30, I kissed her on the cheek, asked about her day, and grilled chicken like everything was normal. She talked about a listing she was trying to close. A 4-bedroom in the new development on the west side. I nodded and smiled and felt absolutely nothing. It was like someone had flipped a switch inside me and all the warmth just drained out. I looked at this woman I'd loved for 2 decades and saw a stranger wearing my wife's face. The next morning, after Rachel and the kids left, I called Laura. I needed to know if she knew, or if she was as blind as I'd been. I asked her to meet me for coffee at a place across town where nobody would see us. She showed up looking worried. When I played the video on my phone under the table, keeping the volume low, her face went white, then red. Then she started shaking. I held her hand and told her we needed to be smart about this. No screaming, no confrontations, not yet. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and whispered that she'd suspected something for months, but convinced herself she was being paranoid. Derek had been staying late at his financial advisory firm 3 or 4 nights a week. He said he was building his client base. She believed him because she wanted to. That afternoon, Laura and I sat in my truck in an empty church parking lot and made a plan. We would both consult attorneys before saying a word to our spouses. Laura remembered that her marriage had a postnuptial agreement Derek had insisted on when he started making real money. The clause was straightforward. If either party was proven unfaithful, the cheating spouse forfeited 70% of joint assets and waived any claim to alimony. Derek had pushed for it, claiming he wanted to protect both of them. Turns out he was only worried about protecting his money from Laura if she ever caught him. He never imagined the clause would be used against him. Rachel and I also had a prenup. My father, a retired attorney, had drafted it before our wedding. Infidelity meant the cheating party walked away with only 25% of community property and no spousal support. Rachel had signed it without much argument, saying she'd never cheat, so it didn't matter. Laura and I hired the same law firm but different attorneys within it to avoid conflicts. My lawyer, Sandra Watts, was a shark in a navy blazer. She'd handled high-profile divorces all over Central Texas. She reviewed the prenup and said it was airtight. Then she asked the question I couldn't answer. How did I get the video, and would the source hold up in court? I told her I had no idea who sent it. She said that was actually fine, we just needed Rachel and Derek to admit the affair or provide enough corroborating evidence that the video's origin didn't matter. She suggested we gather more before making any moves. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 4 more emails from Truth, Fines, U, 22. 2 more videos from what appeared to be the same bedroom, shot from different angles. 3 audio recordings of phone conversations between Rachel and Derek discussing logistics, when to meet, how to cover their tracks, what excuses to use. In one recording, Rachel complained that I'd been unusually attentive lately and she was worried I suspected something. Derek told her to relax. He said I was just going through one of my phases where I tried to be a better husband for a week before going back to being boring. That one hurt more than the videos. I also learned something else from the recordings. Derek had been skimming money. His firm managed investment portfolios, and he'd been quietly funneling commissions into a separate account. Rachel didn't know about either, or maybe she did, because in one audio file, she mentioned a Zelle transfer of $12,000 into an account she called our rainy day fund. I brought this to Sandra, who nearly fell out of her chair. She said if we could prove they were hiding joint marital assets, it would make the divorce proceedings devastating for both of them. Laura discovered her own bombshell. Going through Derek's home office while he was at work, she found a lease agreement for a furnished apartment downtown. Rent, $2,400 a month, paid through Derek's firm as a client meeting space. The lease was in Derek's name and the company's. Laura photographed everything and brought it to her attorney. We now had the location of their love nest. I kept wondering who Truth, Fines, U, 22 was. A disgruntled employee at Derek's firm? A neighbor who'd seen something? A private investigator hired by someone else entirely? The emails came from a Proton Mail account, untraceable. The videos were high quality, steady, clearly from mounted cameras. The audio was crisp, like it came from devices planted directly on their phones. Whoever this person was, they had access, skills, and patience. I was grateful, but I was also nervous. What if they decided to release the evidence publicly before I was ready? 3 weeks after that first email, Sandra and Laura's attorney filed the divorce petition simultaneously. We timed it for a Thursday afternoon. Both Rachel and Derek were served at their workplaces. I had already moved 80% of our joint savings into a new account under my name only, keeping detailed records of every balance before and after. Laura did the same with her accounts. Rachel called me 17 minutes after being served. She was screaming. "How dare I?" she said. "How could I do this to our family?" she said. She demanded to know who had poisoned me against her. I stayed calm, using the same voice I used on construction sites when a beam was about to give, and everyone needed to evacuate slowly. I told her I knew about Derek. I told her I had proof. She went silent for about 5 seconds, then switched to denial. There was nothing going on, she said. Derek was like a brother to her. People were spreading lies because they were jealous of our family. I told her she could pick up her things on Saturday morning and that I'd changed the locks. Then I hung up. Laura's conversation with Derek went differently. He didn't deny it. He just got angry. He told Laura she should be grateful he'd stayed as long as he had. He said she was boring and predictable, and that Rachel understood him in ways Laura never could. Laura recorded the entire call on her phone. Her attorney later said it was the most useful piece of evidence they'd ever received, because Derek essentially confessed and insulted his way out of any sympathy a judge might have had. The financial audit was where things got truly ugly. The court-appointed auditor discovered that Derek's rainy day account held over $190,000. Rachel had a separate account with $62,000. Between them, they'd hidden over $250,000 from their spouses over roughly 3 years. When the auditor asked where the money came from, Derek claimed it was from freelance consulting. Rachel said it was from commissions she hadn't reported on their joint taxes. The auditor pointed out that failing to report income on joint tax returns filed under both spouses' names was potentially fraud. Derek's face went gray. Rachel started crying. The hearing was held 6 weeks later in front of Judge Patricia Harmon, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd been on the family court bench for 20 years. Laura and I sat on one side with our attorneys. Rachel and Derek sat on the other with theirs, a slick guy named Craig Weaver who kept adjusting his cufflinks. Our 3 kids sat in the back row. I'd told them about the divorce 2 days after filing. Emma had been quiet. Jack had punched a wall in the garage. Chloe had cried for an hour, but all three of them insisted on being at the hearing, and I couldn't say no. Judge Harmon reviewed the financial disclosures first. She noted the hidden accounts and the unreported income. She asked Derek directly whether he'd used company funds to rent an apartment for personal use. Craig Weaver tried to object, but Derek, either out of arrogance or stupidity, answered yes but said the company had approved it as a perk. Judge Harmon made a note and moved on. When it came time to establish the grounds, Sandra presented the photographs Laura had taken of the lease, the financial records, and the screenshots from the videos. Craig Weaver demanded to see the actual video evidence and questioned its authenticity. Judge Harmon turned to me and asked if I could verify the source. I said I'd received the materials anonymously and couldn't identify the sender. She studied Rachel and Derek for a long moment. Then she asked a simple question. Do both respondents acknowledge that an extramarital relationship occurred between them? Craig whispered something to Derek and Rachel. Derek nodded reluctantly. Rachel stared at the table. Craig stood up and said his clients acknowledged a personal relationship but disputed the characterization of long-term planned deception. Judge Harmon almost smiled. She said the prenuptial and postnuptial agreements spoke for themselves. Then came custody. My daughter Emma raised her hand. Judge Harmon looked surprised but nodded. Emma stood up and said, clearly and without hesitation, that she and her siblings wanted to live with me. She said her mother had lied to the entire family, and that trust, once broken like that, didn't just repair itself. Jack stood up next and said the same thing. Chloe stood up last, visibly trembling but determined, and said she wanted to stay with her dad. Judge Harmon told them she'd take their wishes into account. I could see Rachel trying not to break down completely. The ruling went as well as it could have. I received 75% of our community property and full custody of all three children, with Rachel getting supervised visitation until a therapist cleared her for unsupervised time. Laura received 70% of her marital assets and full custody of Aiden and Sophie. Both Derek and Rachel were ordered to pay child support. The hidden accounts were factored into the asset division, meaning they essentially got nothing back from the money they'd stolen from their own families. After the hearing, Laura and I took the kids to a pizza place down the road. Nobody was celebrating. It was more like the quiet relief after a storm passes and you realize your house is still standing. Emma was picking at her slice when she said, very casually, "So are you ever going to ask who sent those emails?" I put down my drink. "What?" Emma looked at Jack. Jack looked at Chloe. Chloe put down her breadstick and said, "It was us, Dad." The room went quiet. Laura's mouth fell open. I stared at my 17-year-old daughter and said, "Explain." Emma took a breath. "It started last spring," she said. She'd forgotten her laptop charger at home and came back during lunch to grab it. Rachel's car was in the driveway, which was odd because she should have been showing a house. Emma went inside quietly and heard her mother on the phone in the bedroom, laughing in a way Emma described as different. Not her normal laugh. A flirty laugh. Emma stood outside the door and listened. She heard her mother say Derek's name. She heard enough to understand what was happening. Emma didn't tell me. She told Jack. The two of them spent a week tracking Rachel's movements using the Find My app on the family's shared Apple account. They mapped out a pattern. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Rachel's phone went to an address downtown for about 2 hours during what should have been her afternoon showings. Jack found the address on Google Maps. It was Derek's apartment. Then Jack had an idea. He'd been watching tech review videos on YouTube and learned about miniature Wi-Fi cameras that could stream footage to a phone. He researched models, compared prices, and found a set of 3 cameras with built-in microphones and motion activation for about $400. The problem was paying for them without leaving a trace. That's where Chloe came in. My 12-year-old daughter, who I thought spent all her time drawing horses and watching cooking shows, had been saving birthday and holiday money for 3 years. She had just over $500 in a shoebox in her closet. She handed it over without hesitation and told her siblings to get the good cameras, not the cheap ones. They bought the cameras using a prepaid Visa card Chloe purchased at a drugstore with cash. No trace back to any family account. Jack set up the Proton Mail account. Emma came up with the username Truth, Finds, You, 22. The 22 was for the number of years Rachel and I had been together if you counted dating. Installing the cameras was the tricky part. They needed access to the apartment. Emma noticed that Rachel kept a separate key on a small carabiner clipped inside her purse. One evening while Rachel was cooking dinner, Emma slipped the key off, and Jack drove to a hardware store and made a copy in 11 minutes. They returned the original before Rachel ever noticed. Over the next weekend, while Derek and Rachel were at a neighborhood barbecue at our house, the irony of which still makes me sick, Emma and Jack drove downtown, let themselves into the apartment, and installed 3 cameras. One in the bedroom, ceiling light fixture, one on a bookshelf in the living room, and one in the kitchen pointed at the small desk where Derek kept paperwork. Chloe monitored their family location apps from home to make sure neither Rachel nor Derek left the barbecue unexpectedly. She texted updates every 5 minutes. The cameras streamed to a cloud account Jack had created using the Proton Mail address. The motion activation meant they only recorded when someone was in the apartment, saving storage space. Within 3 days, they had their first video. Within 2 weeks, they had enough to destroy 2 marriages. But they didn't send it right away. Emma said they argued about it for almost a week. Chloe cried every night. Jack couldn't sleep. Emma kept going back and forth between wanting to protect me and being terrified of what would happen to the family. In the end, it was Chloe, my 12-year-old, who settled it. She said, "Dad always tells us that the truth matters more than comfort. If we don't tell him, we're lying too." They also found the financial evidence. One of the cameras pointed at Derek's desk captured him logging into his laptop, and the video quality was sharp enough for Jack to read the bank's URL and part of the login screen. Jack spent hours trying to access it before Emma suggested a simpler approach. She waited until she was babysitting Aiden and Sophie at Derek's house, then casually wandered into his office and photographed every document in his desk drawer with her phone. Among the papers were account statements, transfer confirmations, and a handwritten list of passwords taped to the inside of a folder. From there, it didn't take long to piece together how much money Derek and Rachel had been siphoning. I sat in that pizza restaurant looking at my 3 children and feeling something I couldn't quite name. Pride, definitely. Fear, a little. Gratitude, overwhelmingly. But also a strange sadness, because these kids had carried a burden no child should have to carry, and they'd done it to protect me. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked. "Because we knew you'd confront Mom immediately," Emma said, "and we wanted you to have everything you needed so she couldn't talk her way out of it." Jack added that they'd read online about how cheaters often deny everything, unless presented with undeniable evidence. They wanted me to go to a lawyer first, not to Rachel. So they sent the evidence anonymously, hoping I'd react exactly the way I did. Laura was wiping her eyes. She looked at Emma and said, "You protected my family too." Emma shrugged and said, "You're part of our family, Aunt Laura. That's why we did it." I asked if the cameras were still in the apartment. Jack said they'd retrieved them the week before the hearing, during a window when the location apps showed both Rachel and Derek at Craig Weaver's office. All 3 cameras were back in Chloe's shoebox, along with the receipt and the packaging, just in case. "There's one more thing," Chloe said quietly. She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of a text conversation between Rachel and Derek from 3 weeks before everything blew up. In it, Rachel wrote, "Sometimes I wonder why I even started this." And Derek replied, "Because you were bored, and I was there." That's it. That's all it was. That's all we were to them. Boredom and convenience. I wish I could say I had some profound response, some wise, fatherly speech about truth and resilience, and how our family would come through this stronger. But honestly, I just reached across the table and held my kids' hands and didn't say anything for a long time. Laura did the same with her kids, who were too young to understand any of it but sensed the gravity and stayed quiet. That was 8 months ago. Rachel moved to San Antonio. She works at a smaller real estate agency and calls the kids twice a month, though they rarely pick up. Emma told her in a text that she'd consider rebuilding the relationship when Rachel could explain why she did what she did without making excuses. Rachel hasn't managed that yet. Derek was fired from his firm 3 months after the hearing when the hidden apartment lease came to light during an internal audit. His company didn't want the liability of an employee who'd been funneling business funds into personal expenses. Last I heard, he's working as an independent financial consultant out of a rented office in Round Rock, struggling to rebuild his client list. He and Rachel are still together, which I suppose makes sense. They deserve each other. Laura is doing well. She started a nursing blog that's gained a small following, and she seems lighter now, like someone who put down a heavy bag they didn't realize they'd been carrying. We have dinner with our kids every Sunday. It's not romantic, we're just 2 people who went through something terrible together and came out the other side. The kids play together in the backyard while Laura and I sit on the porch and talk about normal things. Schools and groceries and whether the Longhorns will have a decent season. As for my 3 junior intelligence operatives, they're doing fine. Emma got early acceptance to UT Austin, where she plans to study criminal justice. Jack made varsity baseball as a sophomore and has started smiling again. Chloe went back to drawing horses, though she recently added surveillance cameras to some of her sketches, which I choose to find funny rather than concerning. I told all 3 of them that what they did was brave and smart and a little terrifying, and that if they ever pulled anything like that on me, I'd ground them until they were 40. Emma just laughed and said, "Dad, you'd never give us a reason to." She's right, I wouldn't. Some foundations, once you see how they're built, you make damn sure they never crack again.